Welcome, curious minds, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into a fundamental question. It really cuts to the very core of how a complex democracy functions. Where does power truly reside? And maybe more critically, what happens when the very lines designed to constrain that power start to blur? Or, even disappear entirely?
That's a huge question. We're talking about the intricate machinery of government, right? Stuff often unseen.
Exactly. The civil servants, judicial interpretations, the norms that underpin it all. What if those mechanisms, the ones designed for stability, accountability, what if they begin to shift, and shift dramatically?
And not necessarily through the usual legislative channels, but through, say, executive actions or court rulings.
Precisely. That's our core subject for this deep dive. The recent and really significant expansions of executive power in the United States.
Yeah, these aren't just isolated incidents making headlines. They seem to represent something more fundamental shifting.
They've definitely prompted widespread debate, widespread concern. So our mission today is to provide you, the listener, with an unvarnished, deeply analytical examination. We're looking at key developments from recent sources.
We're digging into things like the reclassification of federal jobs, which sounds dry but isn't. Landmark judicial rulings on presidential immunity, that's a big one. And even these aggressive efforts to, well, reshape the civil service itself.
We'll explore the historical context for these moves, too. We need that perspective. And we'll dissect the intricate legal battles surrounding them.
And crucially, I think we'll draw some striking parallels. We'll look at international examples where, similar tactics have played out, often with predictable and, frankly, detrimental outcomes for democracy.
So this deep dive aims to give you a thorough, multifaceted understanding of these complex shifts in American governance straight from the source material.
It's quite a journey we have mapped out.
It is. So let's lay out the roadmap for you. First, we'll unpack a new executive order. It creates a new class of federal employees, and it seems fundamentally designed to prioritize loyalty over, say, expertise.
Then we'll analyze a pivotal Supreme Court decision, one that has reshaped presidential accountability in a way we haven't seen before.
Next, we'll delve into the aggressive tactics, things used to control and, some would say, intimidate the federal bureaucracy. That includes the disquieting use of watch lists targeting individual civil servants.
From there, we widen the lens. We'll examine stark echoes of these patterns in modern regimes like Turkey, Hungary, Russia, to understand the predictable outcomes when these paths are taken.
Then we pivot back to the remaining guardrails within the American system itself. The laws, the courts, the internal resistance, whistleblowers. Are they holding?
And finally, we'll rigorously debunk the main justifications offered for these power surges, particularly those narratives around efficiency and the infamous deep state. We'll contrast those claims with their actual effects on democratic governance.
It's an extensive journey, absolutely, into the shifting landscape of American executive power, essential for understanding the mechanisms really at play right now.
A new Schedule G, loyalty over expertise.
Okay, let's begin. Chapter 1. We're looking at what might seem, maybe on the surface, like a dry administrative change. But it has profound implications. Let's call it the quiet revolution in federal employment.
Right. So mid-July 2025, the White House makes an announcement. And despite its sweeping nature, it seemed to land with, well, relatively little fanfare.
And this was President Trump signing an executive order. An order creating a new classification of federal employees, specifically dubbed Schedule G.
And what's really crucial here, as you mentioned earlier, this wasn't a legislative act. That would require Congress debate the whole process. This was an executive order.
Yeah.
It highlights the unilateral power involved in making such a, fundamental structural change to the federal workforce.
So what does Schedule G actually do?
Okay, its core mandate is explicit. It's designed to make it significantly easier to fire federal employees, specifically those who fail to carry out a president's priorities.
Wow. So it introduces a direct performance criterion tied specifically to the presidential agenda, not just job function or merit.
Exactly. It's a major shift. It effectively converts many long-standing civil servants, people with careers in government, to at-will employment status.
At will. So, like in the private sector.
Yeah.
You can be fired for almost any reason or no reason, as long as it's not illegal discrimination.
Precisely.
Okay.
It strips them of those traditional job protections that have been the bedrock of federal service for, well, over a century.
And our sources connect this directly to an earlier idea, right? Schedule F.
Yes. It's framed as a Schedule F-style reclassification. It directly revives a plan that was proposed back in 2020 but ultimately terminated. That original Schedule F proposal sought to reclassify tens of thousands of policy-related civil service jobs to this same at-will status.
And President Biden canceled Schedule F in 2021.
He did, which really underscores the cyclical, the contested nature of this whole policy debate. It keeps coming back.
And the potential scale here, it's not trivial.
Not at all. The scale is staggering. This isn't about a few dozen high-level positions. Remember the baseline fact. The U.S. Federal Civil Service has roughly 2.3 million civilian workers.
2.3 million.
The vast majority traditionally hired based on merit, protected from political firing. Schedule G could potentially strip vast numbers of these workers of their job protections.
That's a fundamental erosion of norms then, particularly the idea of a politically neutral career staff.
Absolutely. That norm is crucial. Schedule G implies that policy-involved career staff, people who advise on and implement policy, would now be expected to leave when the president leaves. That directly erodes the norm of continuity, of nonpartisanship across administrations, that stability is or was a key feature.
So you have this tension. The administration says it's about efficiency, running government like a business. Sounds appealing, right? Streamlining.
It does have that surface appeal, efficiency, responsiveness.
But critics immediately saw it very differently. They called it a bid to purge disloyal officials, to cement presidential control over the bureaucracy.
That's the core tension, efficiency versus control. And this tension has deep roots in American history.
Let's dig into that history. The foundations of merit versus patronage.
Okay, we have to go back to the Pendleton Act of 1883. This act is hugely significant historically. It was a direct response to the notorious spoils system of the 19th century.
The spoils system, where government jobs were basically handed out as political favors.
Exactly. Openly exchanged for political loyalty, which, unsurprisingly, led to rampant inefficiency, corruption. People got jobs they weren't qualified for.
So the Pendleton Act changed all that.
It ushered in a new era, an era of merit-based hiring. It emphasized qualifications, performance, not political allegiance. This was revolutionary. It formed the bedrock of the modern professional civil service we've known for over 140 years.
And under these laws, protected from political firing means something specific, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not that you can never be fired.
Correct. It distinguishes termination for cause, things like actual misconduct, proven poor performance, which is still allowed from arbitrary dismissal based purely on political alignment or, just not liking someone's views. It was a crucial safeguard against the excesses and corruption of the spoils system.
And it created this dual structure in the workforce.
Right. We need to remember the long-standing tradition. A new president comes in, they appoint about 4,000 people, agency heads, advisors, top policy roles, that's the political layer, meant to steer policy according to the election mandate. But traditionally, they cannot remove the career staff at will. Those are the people who provide continuity, expertise, impartial implementation. It's a deliberate design, two distinct categories.
Okay, let's try to visualize this shift. We can imagine maybe a kind of spectrum diagram, verbally.
Good idea. On one extreme, you have the pure spoils system,
Yep.
total patronage. Jobs or rewards for loyalty, high turnover, often incompetence. Chaos, really.
Then in the middle.
The merit system, established by Pendleton. Positions filled based on skills, qualifications. Promotes stability, expertise, nonpartisanship.
And Schedule G, where does that fit?
Schedule G represents a significant shift back towards the spoils end. You could call it a loyalty-based at-will system. The appearance of efficiency might mask a deeper intent, control through political alignment, not professional competence. It moves away from the historical intent of Pendleton.
Okay, let's do a quick mega recap for this chapter.
Good plan. So, this first section, we really illuminated the profound administrative shift from President Trump's mid-2025 executive order creating Schedule G. This order essentially turns many career civil servants into at-will employees, makes them vulnerable to firing if they don't perfectly align with presidential priorities.
And we noted this is a revival of the 2020 Schedule F concept, challenging over a century of civil service protections from the Pendleton Act of 1883.
Right. Proponents frame it as boosting efficiency, making government businesslike, but critics see it very differently. A strategic move to purge perceived disloyal officials, consolidate presidential control, and erode that vital norm of a politically neutral professional bureaucracy.
Got it. Now for the flashcard version. Key takeaways.
Okay, flashcard style. Schedule G, Executive Order, July 2025. Created by President Trump. New federal employment classification.
Purpose. enables easier firing of employees if they fail to carry out presidential priorities, converts many to at will.
Historical context. Revives the 2020 Schedule F idea. Aims to strip protections from potentially vast numbers of the 2.3 million federal workers.
Impact. Erodes the norm of a politically neutral career civil service. It's a shift from merit-based towards a loyalty-based system.
Controversy. Administration sets efficiency. Critics call it a purge designed to cement presidential control.
Court-sanctioned immunity. President above the law.
Okay, let's shift gears now. Chapter 2. The expansion of executive power isn't just happening through these administrative changes like Schedule G.
No, there's a parallel track. An equally significant expansion has emerged via the courts.
Which really highlights a multi-pronged approach to consolidating power, doesn't it? You have the executive orders, and then you have the judiciary's role.
Absolutely.
Right.
And here we're talking about a truly landmark decision from the U.S. Supreme Court. The case is Trump v. United States, decided in 2025. And it's pivotal because, for the very first time, the court recognized a form of presidential immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts.
For the first time ever.
First time for this specific kind of immunity relating to official acts post-presidency. The core holding from the 6-3 majority was that a former president cannot be prosecuted for actions that were within his constitutional powers as president. This introduces a really novel legal shield, something quite different from anything we've seen before in U.S. law.
And the scope of this immunity, how broad is it?
Well, the ruling effectively granted 2 tiers. Absolute immunity for what the court identified as core official acts.
Absolute, meaning completely protected.
Essentially impenetrable, yes. And then at least a presumptive immunity, even for acts considered borderline.
Presumptive. So harder to prosecute, but not impossible.
Theoretically, yes. It implies a high bar, but the way the decision is structured, it makes challenges extremely difficult, almost effectively absolute in practice for many scenarios.
And the immediate consequence was huge, right? Especially regarding the 2020 election investigations.
Massive. The ruling immediately threw out lower court decisions. It effectively shielded the former president from criminal charges related to his efforts to overturn the 2020 election results.
So the practical outcome, delaying a trial, maybe preventing it altogether.
Exactly. It immediately raised huge questions about accountability for past actions, delaying or even foreclosing a trial on those specific charges.
And the dissenting justices, they weren't quiet about this.
Not at all. They powerfully sounded the alarm, as our sources put it. They warned that the majority opinion had created a, and this is a direct quote, law-free zone around the president.
A law-free zone. That's incredibly strong language.
It is. It underscores the depth of their concern. And they used another powerful analogy.
The king metaphor.
Yes. The dissenters argued, in every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. Think about the philosophical weight of that comparison. The entire American project was founded on rejecting monarchy, rejecting the idea of a ruler above the law.
And President Biden also weighed in.
He did. He called the decision a dangerous precedent. He warned that it means the power of the presidency will no longer be constrained by the law. This shows the concern wasn't just partisan. It was about the systemic effects on the balance of power.
So this judicial decision dramatically bolstered the formal power of the presidency, its legally recognized authority.
Precisely. But critics argue this comes at a grave cost, a cost to the rule of law itself. It challenges that fundamental democratic principle that no one, especially not those in power, is above the law. It strikes at the heart of what it means to be a constitutional republic.
Let's talk about those philosophical underpinnings. Separation of powers, for instance. How does this ruling affect that?
Well, the separation of powers doctrine divides power between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Each checks the others. This immunity ruling fundamentally alters that balance. It significantly reduces judicial oversight over certain executive actions, shifting power towards the executive, away from the other branches.
And the rule of law concept itself?
That concept holds that laws apply equally to everyone. No one's exempt. This ruling explicitly creates an exception for presidential official acts. That exception could erode public trust in equal justice under law.
There's also this tricky distinction, right, between official acts and personal acts.
Absolutely critical. Immunity is granted for official acts, not personal ones. But defining that boundary, it's inherently difficult. There's huge potential for expansive interpretation. What exactly counts as an official act? Especially those borderline ones. It could lead to a much broader shield than perhaps even the majority intended.
And just to hammer this home, this was genuinely new territory for the court.
Completely. We have to re-emphasize, this is the first time the U.S. Supreme Court recognized this specific form of presidential immunity from prosecution for official acts. The lack of historical precedent makes the ruling exceptionally significant, a real departure.
Okay, let's try another verbal diagram, a power shield diagram.
Right. Imagine a series of concentric circles around the president, representing areas of accountability. Traditionally, these circles had openings, ways for oversight, legal challenges to get through. This Supreme Court ruling, you could visualize it as sealing off significant portions of that inner circle related to official acts.
Creating a zone of legal impenetrability.
Exactly. A power shield that makes certain presidential actions basically beyond immediate judicial reach.
Okay, let's do a quick micro recap here. We've just unpacked the Supreme Court's landmark immunity ruling in Trump v. United States 2025.
Right. A 6-3 decision granting for the first time immunity from prosecution for official acts, either absolute or presumptive.
Its immediate effect was shielding the former president from 2020 election-related charges.
And sparking powerful dissents, warning of a law-free zone, a president becoming a king above the law.
Raises profound questions about accountability and the rule of law.
Absolutely. Now let's transition. We've seen formal power expansion via orders and courts. Let's look at the informal control exerted over the civil service. It's a different beast, but just as impactful.
Purging the civil service. From mass layoffs to watch lists.
Right, so we've covered the formal power expansions, Schedule G, the immunity ruling, but there's this other dimension, the aggressive expansion of informal power.
Yeah, and informal power here isn't about new laws or corrupt decisions. It's about, well, tightening control over the people within the government, actively sidelining dissenters, pushing people out, getting loyalists in. It's often strategic, sometimes subtle, bypassing those formal legal channels.
And this seemed to happen fast, when the Trump administration returned in 2025.
Very fast. Our sources describe how they moved quickly to reshape the federal bureaucracy almost immediately upon returning to office in January 2025. It signaled a deliberate, rapid campaign to assert control. A prime example, what some called the late-night purge of inspectors general.
Inspectors General, the IGs, remind us of their role.
They're the independent watchdogs within agencies, crucial for oversight, accountability. They investigate waste, fraud, abuse, misconduct, meant to be independent.
And what happened to them?
Less than a week into the new term, 17 IGs were fired, just like that.
17? That sounds unprecedented.
It was unprecedented, and sources highlight it was done without the legally required 30-day notice to Congress, a clear violation of statute. Oversight councils, experts widely deemed it illegal.
What was the justification?
The White House cited changing priorities, which seemed incredibly thin, frankly, given the IG's independent oversight function. The strategic aim seemed pretty clear: clear the decks to replace these independent watchdogs with loyalists, remove those internal checks.
And there was pushback.
Oh, yes. Representative Adam Schiff put it bluntly. Trump wants no accountability for malfeasance in office. He is refilling the swamp. But even Republicans like Senator Chuck Grassley, a longtime advocate for IGs, pressed for explanations, noting the law wasn't followed.
But the firing stood.
They did, and the signal it sent was unmistakable, chilling even. No internal check on presidential actions would be tolerated.
And this IG purge wasn't an isolated event. It was part of something broader.
Exactly. Just one part of a wider campaign of, well, slashing and sidelining. Agencies were directed not just to cut staff numbers, but to actively scrap programs seen as odds with Trump's agenda.
Like what kind of programs?
Sources mentioned things like diversity initiatives, certain policy analysis roles, a direct attempt to align the bureaucracy's activities with specific political objectives, sometimes irrespective of congressional mandates.
And this hit critical sectors, too. National security, foreign policy.
Yes. In early 2025, reports surfaced that more than 150 national security and foreign policy officials were abruptly sidelined. That often meant reassigned to jobs with no real duties, or effectively demoted, part of this restructuring.
The implications there: loss of institutional knowledge, stability in sensitive areas.
Huge potential implications. And the scale kept growing. By mid-2025, the administration unveiled mass layoff plans across dozens of agencies. A truly systemic shift seemed underway.
Which naturally led to legal challenge.
Right. Federal employee unions, civic groups sued, and initially a U.S. district judge issued an injunction, blocked large-scale firings at about 20 agencies, citing likely illegality without congressional approval, so some initial legal resistance was successful.
But only initially.
Only initially. The Supreme Court swiftly intervened. In June, it paused the injunction, allowing the layoffs to go forward while the appeal was pending.
And the impact of that pause.
Almost immediate. Agencies began executing the cuts. The State Department started firing over 1,350 employees. Education, Health and Human Services resumed layoffs that had been on hold. It showed the rapid, real-world impact once those temporary legal blocks were lifted.
Now, there's another effect here, beyond direct firings, this idea of voluntary attrition.
Yes, the chilling effect. It's crucial. These purges, these layoff plans, they create a climate of fear, and that fear encourages voluntary attrition.
Meaning people just quit before they get pushed out.
Exactly. Some agencies actually ended up firing fewer people than planned because thousands of workers have quit, retired, or taken buyouts preemptively. So the mere threat of being purged or the loss of job security from Schedule G itself prompted an exodus of experienced staff. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
And the consequence of that.
A profound chilling effect. Career experts, people who might offer candid advice, maybe dissenting expertise based on facts. They're pressured to leave, or at least keep quiet, lest they be publicly branded as disloyal. This fundamentally alters the quality of advice, the information, frankly, the truthfulness available to the executive branch.
Okay, time for a mega recap of Chapter 3.
Right. So this section dissected the aggressive expansion of the executive's informal power. It started with that unprecedented, likely illegal purge of 17 inspectors general in January 2025. A clear signal. No internal accountability tolerated.
Then we saw the broader campaign. Slashing staff, sidelining over 150 national security officials, mass layoff plans across dozens of agencies.
Lower courts tried to block some layoffs with injunctions, but the Supreme Court paused those, allowing thousands of firings to proceed, like the 3,350 plus at the State Department.
And critically, we explored the chilling effect, how the climate of fear and the threat of Schedule G pushed thousands more experienced workers to preemptively quit or retire,
leading to a significant exodus of institutional knowledge, critical expertise, and importantly, candid advice from the civil service.
Got it. Flashcard time for Chapter 3.
Flashcard. IG Purge, Jan 2025. 17 independent inspectors general fired without legal notice, signaled no tolerance for internal accountability.
Bureaucracy reshaping. Agencies directed to slash staff, scrap programs. Over 150 national security officials sidelined.
Mass layoffs. Plans for cuts across dozens of agencies. SCOTUS paused injunctions, allowing firings, for example, 1,350 plus at State Dept.
Chilling effect. Threat of purges Schedule G led thousands of experienced workers to quit or retire preemptively. Self-attrition driven by fear.
Consequence. Erosion of independent advice, significant loss of expertise, intense pressure to conform, fear dominates.
Deep state on notice, targeting and intimidating civil servants.
Okay, we've seen the formal power grabs, the informal purges, and chilling effects. Now, Chapter 4 delves into something perhaps even more, well, insidious.
Yeah, this is the rise of political watchlists. Specifically designed, it seems, to root out purported subversives within the government itself.
This feels like a step beyond general purges. It's targeted, individualized.
It is. And a key player identified in our sources is a pro-Trump activist group, the American Accountability Foundation, or AAF. Their method, disturbingly simple yet effective. They compile online lists of individual civil servants, public lists.
And the criterion for getting on these lists?
Being deemed insufficiently loyal to the Trump agenda. Again, reinforcing that shift from merit or neutrality to personal political allegiance.
And these are public lists, naming names.
Yes, public. Making individuals identifiable.
Yeah.
And they explicitly label these employees as targets, literally putting a target on their backs.
What kind of actions land someone on these lists?
The basis for accusations is often incredibly broad, sometimes seemingly apolitical. Sources give examples like promoting diversity initiatives, enforcing immigration laws as written under previous administrations, or simply having worked under prior presidents, regardless of their actual work or beliefs.
Is there a demographic pattern?
Sources note a troubling trend. The lists often seem to focus on women and people of color, many with long apolitical careers, suggesting possible demographic targeting, intended or not.
And these lists feed into the deep state narrative.
Absolutely. They are a powerful tool for narrative construction. They effectively paint these often nonpartisan staff as being part of the obstructive deep state, thereby reinforcing the narrative that justifies their removal.
What's the impact on the individuals named?
Devastatingly personal, according to reports. Many reported experiencing harassment, threats, serious damage to their professional reputations. It moves beyond policy debate into personal destruction.
And did it lead to people leaving their jobs?
Significantly so. One stark statistic. By one count, at least 88 people, that's fully half of those named on AAF lists, have already left government service.
Half. Were they fired, or did they leave because of the lists?
It seems to be a mix. Some were likely caught in the mass layoffs we discussed earlier, but many others were reportedly pushed out by the sheer fear and pressure generated by being publicly targeted. Fear of being next. Some faced tangible, real-world harassment, too. Being called traitor in public, even vandalism at their homes. It shows the immediate dangerous consequences.
What do legal experts say about these lists? Are they illegal?
It's murky. Law professor Danielle Citron is quoted saying, "What is so ominous about these sites is they're close to the line of illegal, but not crossing it." But she clarifies their intent. They are designed to silence and intimidate public servants. It highlights the deliberate psychological and reputational warfare involved.
And the group behind it, AAF, are they open about their goals?
Remarkably so. Their leaders freely admit their goal is to drive out officials they view as ideologically hostile. No hidden agenda there. AAF President Tom Jones told Reuters, quite candidly, it's important that anti-Trump civil servants know someone is watching and taking names.
Wow, taking names.
He even expressed regret that, quote, more people on our lists haven't left government and handed their jobs over to patriots who will execute on the agenda the American people voted for. It reveals the underlying ideological objective very clearly.
And this rhetoric that career staff who dissent are unaccountable bureaucrats subverting voters' will, that justifies the purge.
That's exactly how it's used strategically. And the timing was deliberate, too. Launching the watch list ahead of the 2024 election effectively helped translate Trump's campaign pledge to clean out the deep state into a concrete, actionable hit list.
The message to anyone still working in government seems pretty clear.
Undeniable. Fall in line with the president's wishes, or risk personal and professional destruction. This toxic atmosphere further tilts power towards the executive. Even apolitical experts, people just trying to do their jobs based on evidence, must now think twice before offering frank analysis if it might conflict with the White House narrative. It leads to a chilling of expertise, a self-censorship.
So what does this represent overall, this use of watch list?
Ultimately, it represents an informal, extra-legal weaponization of domestic security culture, treating your own civil service, dedicated public servants, as if they are a security threat to be monitored, targeted, and eliminated. It draws a really troubling parallel to how states sometimes treat external adversaries, or how authoritarian regimes deal with internal opposition.
Let's try to visualize this with a threat matrix diagram.
Okay, imagine a matrix. Two axes. One axis is perceived threat to administration, low to high. The other is visibility and intimidation, low to high. Watch lists strategically push targeted individuals into that top right quadrant. High threat, high visibility.
By publicly labeling and shaming them.
Exactly. The aim is to create a psychological deterrent. It forces compliance or encourages self-elimination, people just leaving. It effectively weaponizes social and professional pressure. It's deliberate, multidimensional targeting.
Okay, quick micro recap. The rise of political watch lists, like those from AAF, represents a highly targeted and chilling development.
Yes. Publicly naming civil servants deemed disloyal, often based on broad or apolitical criteria, leading to harassment, threats, and a significant exodus. Half those named left government.
The stated goal is driving out ideological opponents. It translates the deep state rhetoric into concrete hit lists.
And ultimately, it's an insidious, extra-legal weaponization of domestic security culture, creating fear, chilling expertise, and tilting power further towards the executive.
Right. Now let's broaden our perspective significantly. How do these patterns we're seeing in the U.S. compare to what's happened in other countries? The echoes, as you said earlier, are stark.
Echoes of autocracy. Lessons from Turkey, Hungary, and Russia.
So what's really fascinating, and maybe alarming, is that the patterns we've been dissecting, the expansion of executive power, the targeting of the civil service, they aren't entirely unique to the U.S. context.
Not at all. They mirror strategies that have been systematically used by leaders in other countries, leaders often described as authoritarian, specifically to consolidate power. Looking at these international parallels helps ground the U.S. developments within that broader global context of, well, democratic backsliding.
Let's start with the case study of Turkey. What happened there?
Turkey offers a really stark example. The specific trigger was a failed coup attempt back in 2016. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's response was incredibly swift and, frankly, brutal. He launched what sources call an unprecedented crackdown, aimed squarely at purging the civil service and other key institutions.
A purge. What kind of scale are we talking about?
Massive scale. Under emergency decrees issued after the coup attempt, over 100,000 public servants were sacked or suspended, and some 37,000 people were arrested within just a few months.
100,000 sacked or suspended? That's staggering.
It is. And the impact cut across wide sectors of society: judges, teachers, police officers, academics. Entire segments critical to a functioning democracy were gutted. The stated pretext was removing coup conspirators, people involved in the plot.
But critics saw it differently.
Yes. Critics argued Erdogan used the state of emergency as cover to eradicate dissent wholesale. Anyone perceived as critical, not just coup plotters. Opposition figures at the time called it a direct coup against the rule of law and democracy.
And the consequence of these purges?
They directly enabled Erdogan's move toward the very personalist style of rule. Power became intensely concentrated around him as an individual. Loyalists rapidly filled the void left by the purged officials. And critical checks and balances, independent courts, media, academia, were systematically weakened or dismantled.
Media outlets were shut down too.
Nearly 160 media outlets were shuttered. Universities were stripped of their self-governance. It all worked together to cement a one-man regime, all under the guise of protecting national security.
And the parallel to the U.S. situation.
It's the playbook. Both leaders, Erdogan and Trump, invoke threats, whether those threats are real, exaggerated, or even manufactured, to justify extraordinary purges of career officials. And in doing so, they entrench their own power. It's a common authoritarian tactic. Leverage crisis to consolidate control.
Okay, let's turn to Hungary, another cautionary tale.
Absolutely. Hungary provides a different model, maybe more gradual, but equally effective in hollowing out democratic institutions. Since Prime Minister Viktor Orban's Fidesz party took power in 2010, the government there has systematically dismantled the professional civil service, methodically replacing experienced, neutral bureaucrats with party loyalists.
Systematically over time, not just one big purge.
It was a sustained strategy, though it started quickly. One of Orban's very first acts in 2010 was pushing through a law that allowed mass firings of civil servants without cause. That resulted in the dismissal of around 1,500 career professionals almost overnight.
Without cause, just gone.
Just gone. Now, that initial 2010 law was later partly overturned by courts. But crucially, as our sources note, it was too late. The systemic damage, the replacement of expertise with loyalty, had already begun.
And that was just the start.
Just the start of a broader strategy. The goal was to ensure that key positions were filled by individuals aligned with Fidesz. Deliberate, long-term political engineering of the state apparatus. Over the following years, the scale of replacement grew. Estimates suggest more than 25% of Hungary's civil servants were replaced by Orban loyalists.
A quarter of the civil service. What were the consequences for how the government actually functioned?
Dire consequences, according to reports. First, a rapid loss of expertise, leading to widespread incompetence in delivering services. Second, increased corruption. New appointees often lacked basic qualifications for their roles, opening the door to graft. Third, cronyism became rampant. These politicized appointees pressured agencies to award lucrative state contracts to Fidesz-linked businesses. And fourth, watchdog institutions were neutered. The very idea of impartial public administration just vanished.
So, by politicizing the civil service,
Orban secured control over state agencies. He built a vast patronage network that enriched his political allies, all while hollowing out effective public services for ordinary Hungarians.
and this is the urbanization people warn about.
Exactly. Dismantling a merit-based civil service was absolutely key to Hungary's democratic backsliding. It's a core part of the playbook. And that fact is not lost on observers in the U.S. who warn of a similar urbanization threat, replacing professional administration with loyalty-based control.
Okay, one more international case. Russia, what's the lesson there?
Russia under Vladimir Putin exemplifies a concept often called the power vertical. Think of it as a fully consolidated executive hierarchy, extremely centralized top-down control.
How is this achieved?
Early in Putin's rule, the Kremlin deliberately rolled back post-Soviet reforms that had aimed to professionalize a bureaucracy. to make it more independent. Specifically, laws passed in the early 2000s stripped away requirements for political neutrality and merit-based hiring in Russia's civil service. In their place, Putin installed a top-down loyalty system. For example, regional governors lost their autonomy. They became effectively appointed by Moscow, not elected locally. Their loyalty was now upwards to the Kremlin.
And the result over 2 decades.
It has produced a cadre of officials whose careers entirely depend on presidential patronage. Their position relies solely on staying in favor with the leader. As one account puts it vividly, the technocrats and policy wonks in Russia's ministries are totally beholden to Putin for their position, but Putin owes them nothing.
Which creates a climate where
no one dares contradict the boss. Bad news doesn't travel upwards. Honest assessment is risky.
So that's the meaning of the power vertical. Everyone answers upwards.
Exactly. All levels of government answer upward to one man's will, not primarily to citizens or even to the law itself. And the result of this extreme centralization, it might look stable, even strong on the surface, but it tends to be brittle. Arbitrary or corrupt decisions by the leader face little internal resistance from a cowed bureaucracy. Real expertise is often sidelined or ignored. Bad news gets suppressed until it's a crisis. Policies serve loyalty and regime stability over public interest or effectiveness.
Now, we need to be clear, the U.S. is not Russia.
Absolutely not. The U.S. system has far more inherent checks and resilience. But the trend is the warning sign. The trend of demanding personal loyalty from civil servants rather than their traditional loyalty to the Constitution and the law is definitely a step down that same road.
So the universal principle here.
It echoes what we see again and again in backsliding democracies. Politicize and purge the civil service, and you erode a key pillar of democratic governance. It's a foundational step towards autocratic consolidation.
Let's try one more verbal diagram. The pyramid of power.
Good one. Contrast two structures. A democratic power structure. Imagine a broad base, empowered citizens, independent institutions, courts, legislature. Power is diffused, accountable, flowing upwards, but also checked laterally and downwards.
Versus the autocratic model.
That's the pyramid of power. The base narrows drastically. All authority, all loyalty is funneled relentlessly upward to a single, often unchallengeable, apex, the leader. And in that pyramid, the civil service transforms. It's no longer an independent body serving the public according to law. It becomes a mere instrument of the leader's personal will, stripped of internal checks, motivated by fear and favor.
Okay, another mega recap. Chapter 5 highlighted global parallels.
Yes, crucial section. We saw 3 authoritarian playbooks. First, Turkey post-2016 coup. Erdogan's massive purge, 100K plus affected, used a crisis to eradicate dissent, cement personalist rule, dismantle checks.
Second, Hungary since 2010. Orban systematically dismantled the professional civil service, replacing over 25% with loyalists, led to incompetence, corruption, cronyism, and the organization threat.
Third, Russia under Putin. The power vertical. Laws stripped merit neutrality, top-down loyalty system, bureaucracy totally beholden, expertise suppressed, extreme centralization.
And the core lesson from all 3.
Politicizing and purging the civil service is a fundamental, universal mechanism for eroding democratic governance and concentrating executive power. It's step 1 in the authoritarian playbook.
Flashcard time for Chapter 5.
Flashcard. Turkey, Erdogan, post-2016 coup. Unprecedented purge, 100K plus public servants affected, 37K arrested, eradicated dissent, cemented personalist rule, dismantled checks, media, universities.
Hungary, Orban, 2010 plus. Systematically dismantled professional civil service, 25% plus replaced by loyalists. Led to incompetence, corruption, cronyism, democratic backsliding, Orbanization.
Russia, Putin, early 2000s plus. Implemented power vertical, stripped merit neutrality via law, installed top-down loyalty system, bureaucracy beholden to Putin, expertise suppressed, extreme centralization.
Core lesson. Politicizing, purging the civil service is a foundational step in eroding democratic governance and concentrating executive power globally.
Okay, so given these stark international warnings, what about the U.S.? Are there guardrails? Can they hold? That's next.
Remaining guardrails, laws, lawsuits, and whistleblowers.
Right. After looking at those international examples, the obvious question is, what about the U.S. system? Does it have built-in checks to prevent this kind of executive power creep? Are there guardrails?
It's a crucial question, and the answer is, well, yes and no, or maybe yes, but the American system absolutely does have guardrails designed for this purpose. But, and this is the key point right now, their effectiveness is being rigorously tested. We're in a period of significant stress on these institutions.
So let's examine these guardrails. What's the first line of defense?
One of the primary ones is statutory law and union protections. We talked about the Pendleton Act of 1883. That and subsequent laws explicitly enshrine merit-based hiring and protect career employees from purely political firing. These laws are the legal bulwarks. They were designed precisely to prevent a return to the spoils system we discussed earlier.
And Schedule G is a direct challenge to those laws.
Exactly. Trump's Schedule G order is a direct attempt to carve out a massive exception to these established protections, to basically bypass them through executive action.
So how do you fight that?
Litigation. This acts as a crucial break, or at least a potential break. The implementation of Schedule G is being actively fought in court. Federal employee unions, advocacy groups, they've sued. They're arguing the reclassification, the mass layoffs are unconstitutional or exceed executive authority.
And does this legal action actually slow things down?
It can. These legal challenges, even if they don't ultimately succeed in stopping something entirely, can definitely slow down the process. Buy time, raise public awareness. We saw that example in mid-2025. A lower court issued an injunction, temporarily pausing the layoffs at about 20 agencies.
And the argument in that lawsuit?
The core argument remains that the president cannot order agencies to be gutted without permission from Congress. It asserts a fundamental limit on executive power over the structure and funding of government, arguing that's Congress's domain.
But the Supreme Court stepped in on that injunction.
It did, and we have to acknowledge the Supreme Court's current posture. Its conservative majority has generally been, let's say, sympathetic to arguments for broad executive power. They paused that injunction. They raised the bar for prosecuting officials in certain Trump-related cases, as we discussed with immunity. So while litigation is a guardrail, its effectiveness depends heavily on the courts, especially the highest court.
But the act of litigating itself has value, keeping the issue alive.
Absolutely. It keeps these issues in the public eye, and, law develops over time. Even unsuccessful challenges now could lay groundwork for future precedents that might limit executive overreach down the road. It's a long game.
Okay, beyond the courts, what about Congress? What can they do?
Congress has significant potential power here, congressional oversight and the power of the purse. First, oversight. Congress has the power to investigate abuses. We saw this with the bipartisan concern expressed over the IG firings. Hearings, inquiries, demanding answers, that's oversight in action.
And they can pass laws.
Yes, legislative authority. Congress can pass new laws to strengthen protections for civil servants or reinforce existing ones, perhaps explicitly countering something like Schedule G.
And the power of the purse. That sounds important.
It's arguably Congress's most potent check. Congress controls appropriations, the government's money. If an administration tries to radically reorganize or defund an agency like that reported order to facilitate closing the Department of Education ultimately, they need Congress to agree to stop funding it. No money, no agency. That's a powerful check, although it can be slow and politically difficult to wield.
But can't a determined president achieve a lot unilaterally? Through executive orders, moving funds around.
They can achieve significant things unilaterally, yes. Especially by reprogramming existing funds, declaring emergencies, using executive orders creatively, skirting norms. However, a truly determined Congress could theoretically rein in or reverse some of these actions through specific legislation or by adding riders to essential budget bills that block certain executive actions.
But that requires political will, right?
Right.
And unity.
Precisely. And the practical reality in 2025, with a narrowly divided legislature, is that such decisive pushback has been limited. The political will hasn't coalesced strongly enough across party lines. Though, it's worth noting, even some members of the president's own party voiced unease at the extremes, like the mass firing of IGs, which suggests political pressure, public backlash, can sometimes act as a curb, especially if actions threaten broader electoral support.
What about resistance from within the government, the civil servants themselves?
Yes, internal resistance and the whistleblower network. This is a really interesting, often misunderstood guardrail. First, let's ditch the deep state mischaracterization. The federal bureaucracy is mostly made up of career professionals, genuinely committed to lawful, effective public service, not some secret political agenda.
So how do they resist?
Sometimes subtly. Some officials might find ways to slow down or mitigate policies they view as unlawful or harmful. The classic yes minister approach, bureaucratic foot-dragging, meticulous adherence to procedure that slows things down. Quiet internal resistance.
And more direct methods.
Whistleblowing. Leaking information ethically and legally, one hopes to inspectors general, if they haven't been fired, to Congress, or to the media. It's important to remember several of the controversies we've discussed, like the AAF watch lists and their impact, only came to light because insiders spoke up, often aided by investigative journalism.
Are whistleblowers protected?
There are laws designed to protect them, yes. Whistleblower Protection Acts. But those protections are definitely under strain right now. When the IGs themselves are ousted, who do you report wrongdoing to safely? It becomes much riskier. But there are also external networks. Current and former civil servants, watchdog NGOs, they actively monitor the administration. They file freedom of information requests, document suspected abuses, mobilize public opinion. This organized scrutiny raises the political cost of overreach.
Okay, let's circle back to the courts briefly. Judicial injunctions, you called them a double-edged sword.
Right. On one hand, lower courts have sometimes stepped in. They've issued injunctions to block policies seen as violating laws, like halting those abrupt mass firings pending review. In some cases, judges explicitly found the administration's actions likely illegal, like the judge noting the IG firings violated the law requiring notice, or another court suggesting defunding an agency without Congress might exceed executive authority. These initial decisions affirm that legal limits do exist.
That's the affirmation edge. What's the other edge?
The other edge is that ultimate outcomes depend on higher courts and on enforcement. And as we've seen, the Supreme Court's posture in 2025 has generally favored broad presidential authority, not just on immunity, but other related cases. Such rulings, especially from the highest court, risk actively undermining the very guardrails, the laws, the oversight mechanisms that we rely on.
But the judiciary isn't monolithic.
Absolutely not. Those powerful dissents in the immunity case, they read like passionate rallying cries for the rule of law. They show deep division even within the court. So it's possible that future courts, or even the same court in a different political context, could draw clear lines, could push back more strongly against the politicization of the civil service.
So the current status of the guardrails, holding, failing?
I'd say they're holding only in part. They're under immense pressure, enough to slow the power creep here and there, create obstacles, raise awareness, but not, so far at least, enough to stop it entirely or reverse the trend decisively. They are being tested like never before.
Let's try that fortress analogy again, the layered defense system.
Okay. Picture American democracy as a fortress.
Yeah.
Multiple layers of defense, outermost layer, statutory law, things like the Pendleton Act, fundamental rules,
Inside that.
judicial review, the courts acting as a legal check, interpreting laws,
Next layer.
legislative oversight, Congress controlling money, investigating, potentially passing new laws.
And the innermost layers.
Internal resistance whistleblowers, ethical officials, and civil society checks NGOs, the free press, acting as an internal alarm system and mobilizing public pressure. Right now, as we've discussed, each layer is under pressure. Some are being breached, some weakened. But the collective system, the fortress itself, still offers significant resistance, though it's definitely being tested.
Okay, micro recap for Chapter 6. We looked at the 4 key guardrails.
Right. 1. Laws and unions using litigation against scheduled layoffs. 2. Congressional oversight and power of purse, with potential but limited by division. 3. Internal resistance and whistleblowers exposing abuses despite risks. 4. Judicial injunctions, a double-edged sword with lower courts affirming limits, but higher courts often favoring the executive.
Overall status. Guardrails holding only partially. Slowing, but not stopping, the power creep.
Exactly. Which leads us directly into our final core chapter, critically examining the justifications used to defend this expansion of executive power. Are they valid?
Efficiency versus democracy. Debunking the deep state narrative.
All right, final core chapter. We need to critically examine the justifications offered for this surge in executive power we've been discussing. Our goal here is to really scrutinize these claims. Do they hold up against evidence, against historical precedent?
Good. Because the proponents, President Trump, his allies, they have a core argument. They claim these steps are necessary to restore accountability and efficiency to government. That government is bloated, unresponsive, needs fixing.
And central to this justification is the deep state narrative, isn't it?
Absolutely central. The idea that a permanent, unelected bureaucracy, the so-called deep state, has been actively subverting the voters' will, acting as an obstructionist force against the elected president.
So the argument follows. A president needs to be able to remove these obstinate officials to enact the policies people actually voted for. A direct mandate argument?
Precisely. It implies the president has a direct line to the people's will and the bureaucracy is blocking it. We heard that echo in the AAF, quote, "They want to be unaccountable bureaucrats. We're going to tell you who these people are." Defending the outing of career staff.
It creates this dangerous conflation then. Loyalty to the president equals loyalty to the people.
Yes, a very dangerous conflation. In this view, civil servants who resist or question are portrayed not just as inefficient, but as undemocratic, as thwarting legitimate change mandated by the election.
And it often gets wrapped up in that mantra, run government like a business.
Right. The idea that the president is like a CEO who should have total freedom to hire and fire at will, install their own team, bypass those pesky civil service protections, all in the name of maximizing efficiency.
And we have to acknowledge these appeals efficiency, voter accountability, cutting red tape, they can sound reasonable, right? They can be attractive to people frustrated with government.
They absolutely can. They tap into genuine frustrations. But, and this is the critical turn, the reality of these measures dramatically undercuts those very claims. Far from bolstering efficient service, purging seasoned experts and independent watchdogs often cripples the government's ability to perform its essential functions effectively and legally.
Let's remember the historical purpose of the U.S. civil service system. Why was it created?
It was explicitly designed, after the disaster of the 19th century spoils system, to promote nonpartisan competence. The goal was to ensure that implementing the law is done by qualified professionals based on expertise and evidence, regardless of which party controls the White House, not implementing a partisan agenda.
This professional backbone provides continuity, institutional memory.
Crucial continuity, vital institutional memory, and it serves as an important internal check against potential abuses of power or purely politically motivated decisions. When a president replaces this merit-based system with one based purely on personal loyalty, it fundamentally turns neutral implementation into personal loyalty.
Politicizing decisions that should be technical or legal.
Exactly. Decisions that should ideally be based on facts, data, scientific evidence, legal interpretations, they become politicized, driven by partisan agendas or loyalty tests.
So the claim of efficiency rings hollow.
It rings hollow in practice. Firing inspectors general who inconveniently call out waste, fraud, or abuse. That's not improving efficiency. That's eliminating accountability and oversight. They're often intertwined.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine removing a competent pandemic expert because their scientific advice contradicts the administration's preferred political messaging. Or firing a climate scientist for the same reason. Would that make the agency more effective at protecting public health or the environment? No. It would just make it more obedient, potentially leading to catastrophic policy failures down the line because decisions aren't reality-based.
So many of the officials targeted are the ones who speak truth to power.
Precisely. They are often the very people who might raise alarms about fraud, waste, abuse, failed programs, critical security threats, the people you need for good governance. History is littered with examples where eliminating or intimidating these experts leads to less oversight and demonstrably worse outcomes. Think about the failures in the Hurricane Katrina response or aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic response where sidelining scientific experts proved disastrous.
And the international evidence backs this up. Efficiency as a pretext.
Consistently. Look at Hungary again. Orban's purge led to a significant loss of expertise in the public sector. Corruption soared as lucrative contracts went to unqualified political cronies. Reports indicate even basic services like water and electricity provision became less reliable after experienced staff were replaced by loyalists. That's the opposite of efficiency.
And Turkey.
Similar story. The mass purge, justified by security concerns, ended up crippling institutional capacity across the board. It crippled the justice system, all while consolidating Erdogan's personal control. The conclusion is unavoidable. These outcomes are the opposite of good governance. They show that purges fueled by loyalty tests consistently gut the very effectiveness and accountability that proponents claim to seek.
Are there signs of this dysfunction in the U.S. already?
Sources point to some signs. For instance, the Justice Department actually argued in court that revealing its detailed layoff plans would hurt its ability to retain and recruit workers.
They admitted the chaos was driving talent away.
Essentially, yes. Admitting that the fear and uncertainty were making it hard to keep good people. And think about morale. It plummets in agencies where public servants are constantly vilified, treated as enemies within. A system staffed by fearful people or purely loyalist appointees becomes prone to errors, legal violations, ethical lapses, even basic incompetence, because everyone's incentive shifts from serving the public according to law to pleasing the leader at all costs.
Okay, let's tackle the other justification. The deep state narrative itself. Does it hold water?
It really fails a basic reality test. While individual bureaucrats obviously have personal views, the civil service as a whole is fundamentally constrained. Constrained by laws, by regulations, by congressional oversight, by judicial review. They can't just do whatever they want.
And they swear an oath.
A crucial point. Career officials swear an oath to the Constitution, not to a political party, not to a president. And the evidence suggests the vast majority carry out the lawful directives of the elected government, whether they personally agree with those directives or not. That's professionalism. In fact, if you look at recent years, there are plenty of instances where bureaucrats did follow controversial orders, like enforcing certain immigration policies, until those orders were challenged or struck down by courts or internal legal checks. That shows the system working when checks are active, not bureaucrats running wild.
So where does the deep state idea come from?
Sources suggest it's largely a myth, or at least a massive exaggeration, propagated primarily by those seeking justification for radical changes, for purges. Again, look at the authoritarian playbook. Protect Democracy's research finds that autocratic leaders regularly manufacture fears of a shadowy cabal lurking within the bureaucracy. Why? To scapegoat these institutions for the leader's own policy failures or unpopularity, it's a disinformation tactic. Rally the base, justify the purge. Trump's rhetoric about the deep state fits this pattern perfectly.
So if the deep state isn't the real threat to voters' will, what is?
The real threat to the voters' will, arguably, is when a single leader can effectively negate laws passed by the people's elected representatives in Congress. How? By bullying, intimidating, or removing anyone in the executive branch who tries to interpret or enforce those laws honestly, impartially, according to their professional judgment and oath. That is a direct assault on the legislative process, on the rule of law, on the very idea of a government bound by laws, not the whims of one person.
Let's try that final verbal diagram, perception versus reality.
Okay. Imagine that split screen, one side labeled the promise or perception. That's where you put the stated goals, efficiency, accountability, executing the democratic will. Sounds good. On the other side, label it the reality or the outcome. Based on the evidence we've discussed from the U.S. and abroad, what actually happens. Loss of expertise, increased corruption, reduced oversight, fear-driven decisions, weakened institutions, politicization. The diagram shows how the actions consistently lead to the reality side, directly contradicting the promise. It exposes the efficiency and accountability arguments as, well, often a pretext for consolidating power.
Okay, mega recap for our final core chapter, Chapter 7.
Right. We rigorously debunked the main justifications for the executive power surge. First, the claims of boosting accountability and efficiency. We showed how purging experts and watchdogs actually cripples government function, politicizes implementation, eliminates accountability. We cited the disastrous results in Hungary and Turkey as evidence.
Second, we exposed the deep state narrative as largely a fabricated threat. Civil servants swear allegiance to the Constitution, not a party. This narrative fits a classic authoritarian playbook used to scapegoat institutions and justify purges.
And we argued the true threat to voters' will comes when a leader can override laws by targeting the officials sworn to uphold them impartially.
Got it. Flashcard summary for Chapter 7.
Flashcard. Justifications offered, accountability, efficiency, and combating a deep state, supposedly subverting voters' will.
Efficiency debunked. Purging experts actually cripples government function, leads to loss of expertise, politicizes implementation, eliminates accountability. Evidence. Hungary, Turkey.
Deep state debunked.
Yeah.
Career civil servants adhere to the Constitution, not a party. The narrative is largely a myth and an authoritarian tactic to justify purge scapegoat institutions.
True threat identified. A leader overriding laws passed by Congress by targeting officials sworn to interpret and enforce them honestly and impartially.
All right, that covers the core analysis. Ready for the outro? Outro.
So, bringing all these threads together, what we've explored today reveals a profound, frankly interconnected push. The presidency's creeping expansion across three critical fronts. It's not just isolated events, it feels like a systemic push.
Yeah, first, asserting sweeping legal immunity for the president, fundamentally altering accountability. Second, aggressively purging and politicizing the independent civil service, undermining nonpartisan expertise. And third, leveraging domestic security fears, using tools like watchlists to intimidate and eliminate professional employees, creating that climate of fear.
This accumulation of power, as we've detailed step by step, raises profound alarms for American democracy. There's no other way to put it.
It really concentrates authority in ways the founders explicitly feared. They worried about unchecked executive power, What we're seeing is effectively dismantling the very internal checks and balances designed to keep a president tethered to the rule of law, reliant on expertise, not just loyalty.
And the long-term implications, they go beyond any single administration, right?
Absolutely, that's crucial. If these precedents, the broad immunity, the Schedule G-style politicization, the acceptance of targeting civil servants if they hold and become normalized, future presidents, regardless of their party, could exploit them. They could govern with far fewer constraints.
Which potentially imperils the whole delicate balance of powers that defines the American system. It speaks to the future trajectory of the republic itself.
And those stark cautionary tales from Turkey, Hungary, Russia, they loom large here. They serve as grim reminders of how swiftly a democracy can erode when a leader successfully subverts the impartial machinery of government, insulates themselves from accountability. It's a predictable playbook for democratic backsliding. Once started, it's hard to stop.
But we also noted pushback is occurring. It's not a done deal.
No, absolutely. The American system, though severely tested, still possesses inherent resilience. We see it manifesting through those active legal challenges in the courts, through the vital oversight functions of civil society groups, a free press exposing things, and through the principled resistance, often quiet, sometimes loud, of dedicated public servants and whistleblowers who refuse to compromise their oaths. It is a dynamic, ongoing battle.
It feels like we're at a critical point, a climax almost in that long-standing philosophical and practical battle.
Between what?
Between the unitary executive theory, the vision advocating maximal, near unchecked presidential power, and the traditional constitutional system of checks and balances, which intentionally disperses power and mandates accountability. It's a clash of fundamental governing philosophies playing out right now.
And what's truly at stake, when you boil it all down,
according to defenders of an independent professional civil service, it's nothing less than the fundamental DNA of American democracy, the commitment to a government of laws and institutions, not a government ruled by the unchecked will, the whims, of a single individual. That's the foundation.
So let's leave our listeners with a final provocative thought, something to really chew on. Recall Justice Sotomayor's stark warning in that immunity case dissent. In every use of official power, the president is now a king, immune.
A king! That language is so potent because it echoes the very origin story of the United States, a profound rejection of monarchy, the establishment of a government accountable to its people, accountable to its laws.
So the defining challenge of this moment, perhaps, is whether the American experiment can renew that fundamental rejection. Can it ensure that power remains constrained, that no individual, no matter how powerful, stands above the law?
What will it take for those guardrails we discussed to not just hold, but to be unequivocally reinforced?
And maybe more personally for you, the listener, how might an informed citizenry, armed with the kind of understanding we've tried to unpack today, contribute to safeguarding the institutional foundations of a self-governing republic?
That's a question for deep reflection and perhaps for active engagement.